Have you ever had that I'm in over my head and they're going to find out feeling? Talking about imposter feelings is a start, but you can't share your way out of imposter syndrome.
Where you worry that your success isn't real or that you've just been lucky. One study suggests that up to 70% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career.
Impostor syndrome is created in childhood when our parents deny our authentic self. They do this by shaming us and shaming that authentic self because they're trying to control us into becoming what they want. When a person is experiencing imposter syndrome, they're having a massive shame attack. We're experiencing what is called carried shame.
Impostor syndrome doesn't care about the truth. It doesn't matter whether you have the title, whether you have years of experience, whether everybody around you is telling you how amazing you are. The reality is, impostor syndrome, in fact, it's even more likely to crop up the more evidence you have around you of how great and how deserving you are. It doesn't care about the facts. It's only interested in reminding you and making you feel like a fraud.
Welcome everybody to the Impostor Syndrome Summit for the 8th of June. Today we have another amazing guest whose name is Kenny Weiss. Welcome Kenny. I'm going to read your bio real quick. Kenny Weiss is an advocate for truth, healing, and personal responsibility. As an author, speaker, coach, teacher, and healer, Kenny specializes in helping individuals and couples heal their emotional hurts and pain from the past to reclaim their authentic selves and become the greatest version of themselves. He accomplishes this through the use of his one-of-a-kind transformative emotional mastery method. Welcome, Kenny.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So glad to have you. I don't know if I left out anything out of your bio
so many
that you would
things
like
at a
to
time.
add.
Moderating music, you gotta be able to wear 12 hats at once, right?
I'm trying my best. I forgot to mention actually that you're one of the best dressed gentlemen that I've ever met. So
You're kind. You can blame my mother for that. Our favorite thing to do was shop, and so I just love fashion and spend more. I played 2 pro sports, but if you give me the choice between watching the game or going to the mall, I'll take shopping every time.
that's good to know. So I'll go right into the questions. Tell us your story on how you have experienced imposter syndrome and if you were able to beat it.
Yeah, I think all of us question whether we're good enough. That's just part of being human. It's also there's a level of it that's healthy self-esteem. We do want to keep ourselves in balance and question and hold ourselves accountable. It only becomes a problem when we get stuck in it. And it's not a periodic questioning, but it's a continued questioning. And one of the things I like to differentiate and what gets a lot of people in trouble with imposter syndrome is our society and culture deems success by all of these external things that we accumulate, whether it's cars, the trophy husband or wife, the career, the Gucci handbag or designer suit, whatever it is. They externalize success. And that's probably the biggest mistake. Success is not an external process. It's not about accumulating things. Success is an internal process. It means that regardless of where you are in your journey of achieving whatever it is you want in life, that you like who you are inside. And so ultimately, imposter syndrome in my life experience, my childhood was very difficult. I've been through a lot of traumatic things in my life. And because of that, a lot of traumatic career choices like I played pro hockey and pro golf, but throughout the whole time, I never thought I was very good. So there's the example of the outward appearance. And I was primarily chasing those because I wanted outside approval. I did not know how to gain it from inside. We don't teach society, because society teaches us if you want to like yourself, go achieve these external things. Don't do internal emotional work. In fact, it wasn't until the last 50 years that we made it actually societally acceptable to even look at emotions. And that was with the advent of Oprah and Phil Donahue, the talk shows. So we're very underdeveloped emotionally, and that's why we pursue external success, and that's why the imposter syndrome creeps up in us all. Is we've been taught the wrong method and the wrong values when it comes to success. And so, of course, I battled it, and the way I overcame it was I went and became an expert in all my hurt and pain, because imposter syndrome is a shame attack. We feel less than, we feel worth less because we're pursuing all of those external possessions and external, what's called other esteem or outer esteem, to validate us. Well, I mean, how many actors, actresses, athletes, people who've achieved high stuff, once they get there, they realize, man, this didn't work. I have all this money and fame, but I feel terrible. Well, they use shame to try and, they use the chasing of external success to try and fill that shame hole. There's only one way to do that. You have to do the hard work to attack that shame and learn how. It's not really an attack. It's learning how to love every aspect of yourself, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so that's what I've spent I started my journey of healing in 1987. So I've spent most of my life working internally on myself, and about 20 years before I ever started helping other people overcome this themselves.
I love how you've put it. You said you have to become an expert in your own pain and shame, so that you can be able to understand what you're struggling with.
Yeah.
Your work is rooted in guiding people to emotional mastery. Please explain what emotional mastery is and
Sure.
how it affects people with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's a great question. Emotional mastery has 4 pillars: truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. Think of what imposter syndrome is. Just the word imposter. That means deception, self-deception. As I always say, the single greatest killer in society today, whether it's a relationship, a government, career, doesn't matter what it is, it's self-deception and denial. Our whole culture is set up on creating a false premise, a wall. Look at Instagram, everything. All of that is just deception. This outer facade of who we are and what we believe. And also, because of the shame we all experience in childhood, we create what's called a maladaptive false persona. It's deceptive. We're in denial. We don't know who we are, yet we think we are. So the first step is learning how to get in truth and becoming an expert in how our childhood has created all of this. The next step is responsibility. Well, that's looking at it and going, okay, I was victimized or hurt. But once we become an adult, whether, like, I married 2 narcissists and my first wife was physically and verbally abusive. Now, our culture doesn't want to live in truth. They'll place all that responsibility on, in my case, the woman. Well, sure, she played a part, but here's the part where we're all in deception. Nobody gets in our life unless we choose them. We are responsible. And so we need to get into truth of how our childhood and the trauma we experienced that we haven't dealt created that attraction, and then our exterior pursuit for success, and that how we're basically living this imposter life in every area. Well, once we get into, take the first 2 steps of pursuing truth, taking responsibility, now we have to make a commitment to do the healing work. And that's really, you have to gut yourself. You have to gut your childhood. You have to gut every single decision you've ever made. And you have to become an expert in learning how to confront yourself and all the lies you tell yourself, the manipulations you use against yourself and others. It is an incredibly difficult experience because I've been doing it for a long time, and it's the biggest stumbling block for every client I ever work with is the shame and denial portions of what I talk about in my first book, The Worst Day Cycle, which is what creates the imposter syndrome. Shame and denial are really difficult processes for people to get into because our whole culture promotes the imposter syndrome and playing the victim and placing all the responsibility on the other person. Well, once you do those three, then you get into forgiveness. And that's the ability to forgive yourself and go, look, I'm not a bad person because I married two narcissistic women. Our society and culture and parents don't teach us these things. We're all just doing the best we can with the information we have. We are not bad people. We do not deserve shame. We have worth at all times, even when we are at our worst. And so there's forgiveness for ourselves, and then there's forgiveness for our perpetrators. And so that creates a new neural pathway where we're living in our authenticity, and we can then share ourselves from that place with truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. And so that's ultimately how you conquer imposter syndrome, or really, frankly, any situation in your life.
Okay. You speak of the aspect of shame, and that is brought in during parenting or in a person's childhood experience. Please
Sure.
explain this shame and how it applies to imposter syndrome.
Okay, here's a, and I want to get clear. Imposter syndrome, most people just think work, career, success. You can be an imposter in relationships in every aspect of your life. So I'm going to tell you a simple story to communicate this. I was 10, 11 years old. I reached into the refrigerator to grab cottage cheese, and my mom screamed out at me, "No, no, 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 that's for the dogs." Well, right then, my mom dumped her unhealed shame into me. Now, because we don't teach emotional mastery, because we don't teach attuned parenting, my mom was just doing the best she could. But my parents were 16 and 18 when they were married, 21 and 23 with 4 kids. My dad, was trying to build his empire. 4 kids were all athletes. It's very expensive. And so my mom was on a very strict food budget. So what was happening to my mom was, wait a minute. If all the food's gone, I can't feed the kids. That means I'm not a good mom. She feels shame. So she doesn't have emotional mastery. She doesn't know how to react from that. And so what all parents do in that moment, because we don't teach how to navigate these difficult emotional things, is we dump it into the child. And so what my mom, when she said, "No, that's for the dogs," I heard 3 things. One is, if I eat, I get in trouble. If I eat, my mom doesn't love me. And in this house, number 3, we feed the dogs before we feed the kids. Talk about shame. Now, did my mom say any of that? No. But because we don't teach these concepts that I teach, that's what happens to all of us. Well, I spent most of my life not eating. If someone would ask me how to eat, I'd get angry. And I'd say, I can't stand to eat. It bores me. I played pro hockey and I'd live off super big gulps and ding dongs. I didn't know that I was an imposter. I thought that I just didn't like food and didn't like to eat. But what had really happened is I had detached from my authentic self because of shame being dumped into me. And that's what happens to all of us in childhood in various forms. And now it can get expressed in eating. It can get expressed in our careers. Like, I know by somebody's career, I know the shame they went through in childhood. If they're in finance, there were money issues in their childhood. If they're in real estate, there was no security in the home. They either moved a lot, but there was a total chaos because the act of buying and selling homes is pure chaos. If they're in sales, they were told either directly or indirectly they have no worth. Because think of sales. Every day you start at zero, at no worth. You prove yourself, but then you have to start over. And so they're just reliving what I call the worst day cycle. It's what we all do. It's a universal imposter syndrome that's based on shame that's been inadvertently placed into us because for centuries, our society has not again, the first psychology book was written in the late 1890s. We didn't start opening up the whole emotional umbrella until the early 1970s. So think of that. In the whole human existence, we're 50 years into actually talking about emotions. The equivalent of that is we haven't even discovered fire or tools. That's how emotionally underdeveloped all of us are as a society. And that's why imposter syndrome, we're all feel like imposters because we don't teach the 4 pillars of emotional mastery and how to work through all of these different things. We're not bad people. You can't be blamed because you don't know about this. We're just doing the best we can, but that's what creates all of this.
You've talked about, and it's very important, that imposter syndrome isn't only in the professional aspect, but in other areas, like you've mentioned, even in your eating habits, for example. Would you talk to us about imposter syndrome in relationships? How does it manifest when it comes to romantic relationships?
Sure, that's an easy one. My first marriage, because my childhood, I became the surrogate spouse for both my parents. My mother was an alcoholic who did what's called enmeshment. She basically made me her emotional confidant. Like when my mom, there was a time when she would come to me and say, you know, Kenny, the next time I want to drink, will you just give me a hug? So my mom made me the adult. She made me responsible for her drinking. Of course, she would never come for a hug. And so she would repeatedly abandon me, like over and over. My mom would be sober 4 to 6 weeks and then in a walking coma for 7 to 10 days. So I just experienced horrific abandonment over and over. And my mom would come to me with all of this emotional connection and then remove it. My dad, on the other hand, because he was beat to death as a kid, he didn't hit us, but he was filled with rage. And so I became his dumping ground for all of that rage. Well, when that happens to a child, they learn it's not okay to have your own morals and values and your own needs and wants. I still can remember laying in my bed as a kid thinking about, God, I wonder who will pick me. I wonder when I get married if she'll be pretty and nice and cute. Do you hear how I'm describing that? It's as though I have no
Yeah.
choice because my whole childhood, I never had a choice. And so I've been married twice. Both of them have asked me to marry them. I've never asked a woman to marry them. I was an imposter in my own life. I didn't know how to drive my own life. Did I know that? No. And so I just, waited, especially with my first wife. I was just waiting around to see who would pick me. I was so underdeveloped. I didn't even know I could choose. I was just waiting to see who would choose me. Well, if there's not a more glaring example of being an imposter in your own life and an imposter in relationships, I don't know what else is.
You have touched on it, the worst day cycle. I'd like to request you to go into deeper detail about it and how, in your view, it fosters or helps grow imposter syndrome in a person.
Yeah. I'll try and make it short. That's a very deep process, but I wrote about it in my first book, Your Journey to Success. And the just like emotional mastery has 4 pillars, which are the healers of this worst day cycle. The worst day cycle has 4 pillars, and that's trauma, fear, shame, and denial. All of us go through trauma in childhood. MRI studies show that when mom feels stressed during pregnancy, that literally, and every mom feels stressed during pregnancy, it literally alters the DNA and genetic makeup of the child. That's trauma in the womb. All right. And then simple stories like my mom and cottage cheese. We all go through that. I can't get into all the details of each because it's very elaborate, but we then go into fear. The pieces I do want to touch on because they really apply to imposter syndrome or shame and denial. Shame is where we develop the imposter syndrome. We create a maladaptive false persona that we think is us. We think these are our likes, these are wants, this is our belief about everything, but it's not. Because the first 7 years of life, we're in a theta brainwave state, which is hypnosis. Whatever emotion our parents are feeling goes right into us. So we are just an amalgamation of our parents' unhealed trauma. And that becomes what's called the adapted wounded child. We think this is us. But by the time cognition comes online, we're not even aware that we've adapted a persona and a self that's not even ours. It's all based on what they dumped into us. And that's what kicks us into the shame and denial portion. And so it's a societal problem. Everyone on this planet, I can ask them 3 questions and I can walk them right into how every single person, Jeff Bezos, like you can pick anyone you want. Everyone lives their life by this process. Nobody's immune from it. It is a human dynamic that's never been touched on or talked about or dealt with or spoke, because I discovered it. And so, like I said, we're 50 years into it. That book came out 5 years ago. So we're so early in talking about and discovering the ways we work. This is just a human dynamic that's been prevalent for centuries. And that's what I show in that first book. And so that's where the imposter syndrome gets born, is through the trauma, fear, shame, and denial of the worst day cycle.
Okay. I can see there's some people online. Feel free to post your questions to Mr. Weiss. Obviously, he will be able to answer, and you can be able to understand more about both emotional mastery and imposter syndrome. So, my next question is, in what ways can parents train themselves or support themselves to bring up emotionally strong children? That are not likely to develop this paralyzing imposter syndrome. I guess in I guess looking at the shame and the trauma, what ways can parents make sure that this doesn't happen?
I love the way you phrased it, because it's a window into what parents miss. Parents think about, how can I do something for the child? And that's the mistake. Remember, the first 7 years of life, we are in a theta brainwave state. We're in hypnosis. The single most important thing any parent can do is go become an expert in healing their own worst day cycle and developing emotional mastery, because our children become our emotional condition. Every parent on this planet is suffering through the worst day cycle, trauma, fear, shame, and denial. They don't know that they're in so much pain, and that their belief systems and their outbursts and all of these things are from their own unhealed trauma. So the single greatest thing any parent can do is become an expert in healing your own pain first. But parents sidestep that and go, well, I want to fix my kid. Well, you can't walk a child down the yellow brick road if you've never walked it. And so you have to take that journey first, so that you know the steps along the way, and then you can guide your child through it, because you're going to put the same cycle into your child just for the mere fact that you're human. We're all limited. We're all going to make mistakes. I mean, think of it this way. Tom Brady might be the greatest athlete. People would think, the football player is the greatest athlete that's ever walked this planet. Well, for 40 years, he's had experts teaching him every aspect of the game, nutrition and everything. Every single day, he throws interceptions, incompletions, fumbles. He screws up nonstop because he's human. Well, so are we as parents. And so to believe that we don't make mistakes, or our parents didn't make mistakes, is like the level of narcissism in that. It reaches close to narcissism, because we're really saying, I as a parent and my parents are a perfect God, which just is such a detachment from, remember, truth, responsibility. That's the self-deception. We have to face that. And so the greatest gift we can ever give our children is, throughout our life, work on healing the worst day cycle, healing the trauma, fear, shame, and denial through the use of emotional mastery, which is truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness.
What do you say to someone who says, if it wasn't for imposter syndrome, I would have become a doctor, a paramedic, a lawyer, but now I'm too old?
Yeah.
Or whatever other excuse we create. What is your advice, and what should they do if this is still a dream they hold?
It's never too late. We all have neuroplasticity, which means our brain, we are not stuck. Our brain continues to learn and change throughout our life. It's just a choice. Someone who says that is stuck in the shame and denial portion of the worst day cycle. They're stuck in the shame-based victim position that it's over. There's nothing I can do. And they use denial. I'm too old. Those are like all of those excuses are the denial, the self-deception that they use to hold on to the shame persona that they had to develop to attach to their parents. This is where they developed it, is they became all of these maladaptations that didn't pursue being a doctor or whatever the dream was, because they had to fit into the family system, because we all need attachment to survive. So all of those excuses are evidence of the worst day cycle and how they're stuck in the shame and denial portions of the cycle. And so it's simple. It's just like the example with our children. Go become an expert. It's never too late to do the work. We can overcome anything if we make the choice. And all we need is a process to walk us through that. Well, that's why I do all this, is I didn't find anyone out there who laid out a complete process, little pockets, but none of it tied together. And nobody was talking about the real issue, which is all of these aspects that I bring up. And so that's why I stepped into this, was to lay all of that out. That's why I have the online university and all the different things that I do to guide people down that yellow brick road. It's never too late. You just have to make the choice to confront the worst day cycle and start developing emotional mastery.
It's actually my very next question, that you tell us about your coaching programs and how people can get to work with you.
That's a great question. Well, first of all, not everybody is in a financial position to purchase programs. So I produce hundreds of thousands of dollars of free content. I have over 1,000 videos on YouTube. On my website, kennyweiss.net, I have a blog with articles. I have free classes that just got an email from a woman this morning that's in the class going, look, I'm broke, but this free class has saved my life. I just keep watching your YouTube videos and taking this class. And I wish, she wishes she was in a financial position to do more, but she takes advantage of all of that. Also on my website, kennyweiss.net, the resources tab, I have several free downloads that walk you through aspects of the recovery from the worst day cycle. So those are all the free options. For those of you in a better financial position, my first suggestion is start with my book, Your Journey to Success. You can get that on Amazon, or there's a direct link on my website on the shop page. The next step is my online university, the Greatness Movement, or Greatness, gosh, I forget, the Greatness University, my complete suite of emotional mastery classes that walk you through it. And that, if you want to go through all of it, it's only $47 a month. I've made it very inexpensive, where you can get the whole worst day cycle healing journey on my online classes at thegreatnessu.com. If you want to get started with that. I also have a private group, which gives you access to me. It's only $127 a month, so you can text me questions, and I go live twice a month to coach you in a group setting with other people on the journey, so you get support from them, support from me, and live coaching from me. And then for those who would like to work directly with me, right there on my website again, you can book a private session with me. So I work with people all across the world, individuals, couples, business professionals,
helping them overcome the worst day cycle and develop emotional mastery.
So all your links are going to be in the video description. So in case you're watching this on replay, just check out the video description as well as the first pinned comment. We're going to put all these links so that you don't miss a beat with Mr. Weiss. I have a question from yesterday's speaker, Dr.
Yeah.
Victor Mosconi, and
Okay.
he asks you, what do you feel would be one of the biggest barriers or struggles to people overcoming imposter syndrome?
Self-deception and denial. Well, really, you said what would be one of. It's really a combination of the shame and denial portions of the cycle, because of and this, I'll see if I can do a short explanation. But what happens in childhood, because we need attachment, is we become whatever our parents need us to become, whether you recognize it or not. That's what all of us do. And so what we don't realize is that imposter syndrome, that's the false persona that was developed to get attachment to parents. And so our greatest fear is, if I let this go, if I deal with this imposter syndrome, if I face the worst day cycle and all of these things, it's a subconscious process. They don't realize that the reason they're so afraid of facing that is subconsciously they make up in their head, that means I'll lose connection with mom and dad. That's the first thing. The second thing is, wait a minute. I developed this false persona and this belief system about myself. And if I go face it, it means whether I'm 20 years old, 40 years old, 80 years old, I've lived my life as an imposter. Who wants to admit that? Who wants to admit I don't really know who I am? Who wants to admit that I have all these false personas, that I'm in denial and self-deception? And so that shame piece, where we develop that maladaptive false persona, what's called the adapted wounded child, facing that because of the connection to mom and dad, and also the belief that if I let this go, that doesn't mean that means I don't know who I am. That's what makes it so difficult for a person. And that's why we need emotional mastery, to learn how to navigate the transition out of that, so we don't feel so overwhelmed by it.
Well, we have come to our last question.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I wish we could keep talking.
As you can tell, I don't have an issue with rambling on and on about this. I just go.
So, basically, I want you to talk about your books and your motivation behind writing them. How did you get motivated to start putting pen to paper?
Well, that's actually a really great question. I was coming out of my second divorce and I was contemplating suicide. And I spent 3 days holed up in my apartment trying to write my kids a suicide note. And it was very simple for me to talk about how much pain I was in. But when I tried to describe why it would be the best choice for them, because of, I started my healing journey in 1987. So because of all the things I'd learned about psychology, personal development, how the brain and body works, and trauma and everything, every sentence I'd write, I was like, well, that's manipulative. That's codependent. That, like, I knew too much. I couldn't outshrink myself. And I was like, I'm making it funny, but it was a tragic moment of realizing, wait a minute, I can't die and leave this on my kids, but I sure as heck can't live my life this way. What am I going to do? And that suicide, the contemplation of suicide, is in my first book. It's in, my journey to success, where I write about exactly what I was experiencing. And once I realized I couldn't live the way I was living, and I couldn't die, and place that on my children, I had a moment of inspiration, and I realized that the reason I was stuck was because people in this industry won't tell you these deeper truths about childhood and maladaptive and all of these things. Like, it's very confrontive. We just like to give bubblegum pop psychology stuff that makes us feel good and motivated, but that won't get you healed.
And so I went back in my office and I wrote down, I want to come up with a process nobody else has discovered that'll fundamentally change the personal development psychology field that will actually heal people. Well, over the next 2 years, I just had all these epiphanies and insights, and that became that book. And now my next book will be out in just a couple months, which goes much. The first one's very deep. This one goes even deeper because I've crystallized and solidified all of these things even more deeply. And that one is titled Your Journey to Yourself: How You Lost Yourself in Your Authentic Self in the Worst Day Cycle, and Why You Need Emotional Mastery to Reclaim It. And at the latest, it'll be out in December. I'm trying to get it out a little earlier than that. And again, it's a legacy thing. It's about nobody wants to talk about the things I talk about. Not nobody, very few people. And that's why the world is the way it is, because we don't want to deal with denial, and we don't want to live in truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. And my inability to know how to do that almost took my life, and I see it take many. It's the single greatest killer on the planet today. It's not COVID or any of the silly stuff. All that's just a joke. It's self-deception and denial. And so that's the P, because I saw that the reason I was in so much trouble is because I was in so much self-deception and denial. And I realized nobody's dealing with it. Well, that's what the hole I wanted to step in. And that's the little bit I wanted to leave behind. And so that's why I can't stop talking about it. And I get so excited. Because in many ways, every time I talk about it, I'm saving my life. I guess that's the best way to say it. Yeah,
it is true.
Yeah, it's making me cry.
As coaches, we tend to coach who we were, and heal ourselves. The more we coach, the more we share.
Yeah, I say this, and no one likes. Well, I don't know if no one, but look, you get in this job. How should I say this? Because this is talk about truth. I don't help anybody. I'm not God. I don't have that much power. I do this because it's a passion for me. Now, is there a side benefit that if somebody follows this stuff and does it, that their life will benefit? Of course there is. But I don't do it for them. None of us do. When people get into truth, anyone who's a healer, teacher, therapist, you're not doing it to help people. That tells me how early are you in the journey, because you still have some shame and a God complex that you actually think you have that much power. You're doing it for yourself. And that doesn't make it bad. You have to be, that's what you have to do. You have to become an expert in yourself. And when you learn that process, then other people will watch me and go, "Ooh, I like that. I don't like that, whatever." And they take what they want. But I see a client once a week for an hour. Every other minute of the day, they're doing the work, not me. I didn't help them. They helped themselves. Now, do I have some wisdom and experience that if they choose to listen to might be a benefit? Yes. But to take the response or to take the credit for somebody turning their life around, they've had their life stolen from them in childhood. I will not steal it from them as their coach. They deserve every ounce of credit. And so they do it for them, and I do this for me too. And that's how we come together in truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. Relationship can happen from that place of truth.
That's an amazing principle that I think everyone should follow. I want to say thank you so much. We have a speaker tomorrow, Vernelli Stedelmeyer. You had already sent in a question for her. So, to all the people watching, make sure you check out that interview tomorrow so that you can see what the question is and how it was answered or how it will be answered. So, thank you so much, Kenny, for coming. I don't know if you have any final comments you wish to make.
The last thing I'd say is you're not to blame. You're not bad. It's not your fault. You did the best you could with the information you had at the time. And therefore, you're not to blame for the perfect imperfections in your life. And now that you have new information, for the first time in your life, you actually have a choice. You can choose to learn about the worst day cycle and emotional mastery and all of this. But before this, you didn't know. And so don't blame yourself, but go become an expert. Choose yourself. Do the healing work so that you can appreciate who you are and live in that place of full acceptance, even when you're being an imposter. Be the success inside, not outside.
That's amazing. I don't think there's anything else I can say to conclude our interview today, except to say thank you once again for participating, for coming on. All the information for Kelly Weiss, as I said earlier, will be in the description. Check out the links for his YouTube channel, for his website, for his books. Make sure you get all the free resources that you possibly can and sign up to work with him if that's a possibility for you. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks a lot.